Order the City of Oconomowoc Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022. Has appropriate meeting notification been made?
Yes, Your Honor, it has. I'll call you Mr. Chairman.
That's okay. If you'd call roll, please.
Alderman Spiegelberg.
Here.
Alderman Mulder.
Here.
Alderman Shellpepper.
Here.
Alderman Kavieski.
Here.
Alderman Douglas.
Here.
Alderman Rozak.
Here.
Alderman Altman-Cloth.
Here.
Alderman Ellis.
Here.
On to committee business, discussion of ordinance 22-01034 to amend section 20.012 of the City of Oconomowoc Municipal Code concerning common council meeting start time. Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mayor. The item before you tonight was a requested item to be on an agenda for discussion, and we're starting out with discussion only on this item. We're not looking for action tonight. It's been requested that we start our common council meetings at 7 o'clock versus 7:30. Our ordinance is clear that meetings shall be held in the council room in the City Hall at 7:30 p.m. As part of the information for you to use in your deliberation and discussion, I had the clerk's department go back, look at the last 6 months to see what time we were actually starting our meetings. So these were what time we were starting the committee meetings, so that you'd be able to judge that if we were to move it back 30 minutes, you know, what's the average time we might be seeing for that start time. So with that, I will leave it up for
So
discussion.
we can open up for discussion. Alderman Shellpepper.
I think we had this discussion about a year ago. It was informal through email, and we decided 7:30 was fine. I'm fine with 7:30, and I'm kind of disappointed we're talking about it again now in a formal session, because I've already spent time on it.
Alderman Spiegelberg.
I don't remember that we spent formal time on this and that we really drilled down on this. As a matter of fact, I had brought this up with Sarah Kitzenbull and Matt T., and they all agreed that we should bring this forward and talk about it, and Mark Fry as well. Every other community that I looked into starts at 7 or 6:30 or some at 6. Now, admittedly, some of those communities don't have meetings ahead of time like we do, but City of New Berlin starts at 6 o'clock and they have meetings before. For example, tonight they had a 5 o'clock utility meeting, and then they were starting their common council meeting at 6. So I'm just kind of wanting to throw this out there and see if we could even back this up to 7 o'clock. I think it would be a good use of our department heads' times, because we ask so much of them, and every time we ask them to stay later for these meetings, a lot of them still have to drive home half hour, 45 minutes, and just that extra half hour gives them less time that they're twiddling their thumbs around here before our meetings start. So, any other comments?
So, Alderman Altman-Cloth.
So I guess as the new person who doesn't really have an opinion on what time we start from a personal standpoint, I will say my months spent in the gallery watching some of the committee meetings, there's a handful of you guys that kind of come, you know, sprinting in here because they're coming from their full-time jobs. So I would hate to see extra stress, you know, that way. But on the flip side of it, I will say, as a community member who attended the meetings, I sure would have loved a 7 o'clock start. So,
Alderman Kavieski.
So part of the evaluation of the start time is the committee meetings prior to? Is that kind of?
Correct.
And not that I'm against it, for it, but the committee meeting structure that's occurring on the council meeting dates started a couple of years ago. Previous to that, committee meetings were not on council meeting days necessarily. So I understand the attempt to try to consolidate, to make time, the best use of time while everybody knows there's going to be something going on, but that's kind of stacked all that up. So I think the 7:30 start time for council meetings are fine. It's an ordinance. It's been there for a long time. Anybody who is a director now or in the past or in the future will know that the expectation of a department head is going to be there if needed. You know that as an alderman when you run. The council or the council committee meetings or any other committee meeting, as we are evaluating how those function. Maybe that gets moved a little bit, so there is some more opportunity not to have that stacked, and we can start on time as opposed to start two later times. But I'm not for moving earlier.
Alderman Ellis.
So there's two issues here that I see. The first issue is, at this point in time, we do have a 7:30 meeting, and according to what I'm looking at here, on several occasions, we've started late. The second issue that exists is the fact that if we do start at 7 o'clock, then all of our committee meetings are going to be starting early. The problem that exists there is that some of us do have full-time jobs, and we will not be able to attend those meetings without making some sort of a sacrifice associated with what our full-time jobs are. That's very concerning. It's tremendously concerning. As already has been stated here, some of us come in here sprinting because we're coming off of a plane or coming off of a final session or something along those lines. We are here to serve the community, and I know we want to do it at 100%. And we have a groove here. The groove is 7:30, the meetings start. We're accustomed to that. I wouldn't have a problem moving the meeting to 7 o'clock if we move the committee meetings either to another day or, well, actually to another day. Because there's no way that I'm going to get here at 4:30. It's not going to happen. It can't. So just take that into consideration. Thank you.
Alderman Spiegelberg.
Yeah, and I hear you. I hear all of you on this. I just thought it'd be worth the discussion. I mean, the one good thing that we do have going for us out here in Oconomowoc, not the one good thing, but one of the good things, is that we do have these meetings ahead of time. A lot of communities don't. So then they're spread out all over the month. However, I found no communities that start at 7:30, and the ones that do have their meetings ahead of their council meetings are starting at 7, and like I said, New Berlin starting at 6. Tonight, utility meeting at 5 o'clock. And all of these other communities have people who have full-time jobs too that have made a commitment and need to get there. I'm not set on this either way. I just kind of wanted to see where everybody's at. Do we keep it as it is now? Do we maybe explore this down the road later? Just kind of throwing it out there, really, so.
Alderman Rozak.
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree with Kevin on this one. I think moving it earlier is going to be tough for me, even though I just work in Waukesha. You know, most of the time I work till 5:36 even on council nights if I don't have. You know, I try to run home for dinner quick, maybe between work. And I think a lot of people try to do that. I think there's also something to be said about the tradition of the 7:30 start time. In Oconomowoc, it's been like that for a long time. I don't even know how long, but people just kind of know 7:30 is the start time. Whenever someone calls me, hey, when's the meeting tonight? 7:30, Tuesday, and for the staff, if we do go earlier, like Kevin said, the one way it would work is if you move some of the committees off to other days. Now you're telling staff that's running the utility or running protection welfare, they got to now come and stay till 6 o'clock or 7:30 or 5:30 on a Wednesday and do a Thursday or do a Monday. So I don't see that that's going to be an efficient use of the staff's time at all. So I think we should leave it as is. I do think we had some type of debate about this before. Chaz is right. I don't know how formal it was. But I feel like we kind of, the council about a year and a half ago kind of said, 7:30 is fine. But I don't mind, as always, discussing things. So I think we should keep it as is.
Other comments? Alderman Mulder.
Just to put my note out there, it doesn't matter to me.
Very
Know where
good.
I stand.
Okay.
Neutral vote.
So
Switzerland.
I'm interpreting, and I just need to make sure that I'm correct, that we've talked about this. We're good about tabling this for probably a long time. It doesn't need to come back unless there's a strong interest that it should come back and be readdressed. Is there any other comment? And does anybody want to speak up? Am I off base? Okay. With that being said, that discussion is over. We'll move on to our next item. discussion on Western Lakes Fire District funding options, and a memorandum of understanding between owner municipalities. I'm going to kick this off initially. We put together a memorandum of understanding among the 4 owner municipalities just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Now, it is just a restatement of our intermunicipal agreement, so it's nothing fancy, and none of the numbers are there. We're not voting on it. It's just a concept to say what happens. So if you think about it, historically, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, but historically, everybody says all for one and one for all. And what we want to do, and that's the way things have been written in the budget, through budget time, what we want to do is look at this and make sure that in the event that the funding, and if it does go to referendum, does not work in the city of Oconomowoc, we want to make sure that everyone is clear as to what happens. And this is the memorandum of understanding is only to help with that process. And so tonight, what we are showing you is just a concept that we'd like to bring to the other municipalities and say, hey, what do you think about this? And just to try to make sure that that discussion is had. So currently, to my knowledge, the owner municipalities have not had that discussion. When I met last week at a board meeting, there was still confusion from one of the owner municipalities. So what we're trying to do is take a little bit more of a leadership role in helping the Western Lakes Fire Department so that as you make decisions in the coming weeks with regard to a potential referendum, everybody's on the same page as to what could happen going down the road. So that's really the reason for the discussion. I want to thank Chief Bowen, also our board members, Charlie Shaw and Jeff Romer, who are also here to answer any of your questions. And so I'm going to kind of turn it over to Mark, who's going to give us a little bit of a time frame as to how this is all laid out, because it's going to come very quickly. And so tonight's is trying to get as much information out there for you so when you make a decision, you have what you need. If there's something you're missing, if there's something you want, tonight's a really good night to tell us, and we'll do our best to work with Chief to get that information. But also you can reach out to us in the next several days, and your point person would be, again, Mr. Fry to do that. So Mark, do you want to give us, and then we'll let Alderman Mulder, who's been very involved in the process, to make some comments.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the topics we want to talk about tonight is obviously the timeline that this is moving, and it's moving very quickly. We will be meeting together as a group on Wednesday, May 11th at the East Campus to have the joint owners meeting, correct? Correct terminology, thank you, Chief, to discuss the survey results. And then based on that, we're gonna look for a quorum of our council to determine how they wanna move forward. And that doesn't leave us a lot of time because, Wednesday night is when that conversation would take place. Thursday noon is when I turn in all the agenda items to the city clerk for distribution. So we won't have a lot of time if there's got to be more discussion or anything like that. So we want to take the opportunity. I can repeat the numbers. I'm pretty sure everybody knows, but they're looking for potentially a referendum, $6.3 million, of which the city is responsible for 35%, so about 2.3 million of that would come to the city. And, just looking to see, are people comfortable with that number? Is there discussion that you want to have on the number? That's completely your call. We just thought that tonight would be a good opportunity to be able to get some of those conversations started, to get information to Chief Bowen as he's working through this, so that when we do meet on May 11th, we'll have a better feeling where everything is and how we can expect things or, anticipate things to move forward, so.
And we'll go Alderman Mulder, then we'll come to you, Alderman Kavieski. Alderman Mulder.
So I think this is a really good step. I would say when we kicked this off last October, the question repeatedly came up, well, what if one of the referendums doesn't pass? That was discussed the last time that the communities all got together. And in fact, the one instance that our consultant had where the referendum did not pass, it was because some confusion in the language down in, I think, in the Elkhorn area, where one of the cities didn't realize that they were even affected. So even if all the municipalities have confidence that it's going to pass, you never know what might trip that up. And if we don't have some language in place that, spells out exactly what they're supposed to do, they need to, get that done on the November, onto the November election. I think it's really wise to do this, or we could end up, really struggling with what to do with our budget, if nothing else. So I'm in favor of this, and I think it was something that, thanks for catching it now. It's something we should have been planning on, so.
Alderman Kavieski.
I have a few questions. To start out with, the Memorandum of Understanding is in place, and we drafted it?
I did. Yeah, Stan drafted. It's not in place. It's just a draft. And what we're doing is asking council what you would like to do and to give us direction.
Yep. So the reason I asked that question, and I'm glad that Stan drafted it, but ultimately, we're partners with these municipalities and part of an ownership group, which is Western Lakes Fire District. So just from a clarity standpoint for me, wouldn't the Memorandum of Understanding need to be directed back toward Western Lakes Fire District as the entity that everybody is funding, as opposed to between the city and the other entities? Does that make sense?
No.
So why are we drafting it?
Well, first of all, I represent every one of the entities that's involved here, and I know that there's confusion with regard to what's going on here. And the mayor came to me and said, hey, should we put something together so that we can have an entree to a discussion so that everybody knows what's going on? That's what I was told. And I think that's probably true. So you have total control as this council of whether or not you want this thing disseminated to the other entities. If you think it's a good idea, do it. If you don't, don't.
I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm just, again, asking, it's Western Lakes Fire District that is looking for the funding. We're part of that funding.
We're their
taking the
boss.
lead. Huh?
We're their boss.
We're not their sole boss, right?
Well, we have 3 other bosses with us.
Correct. Correct. We are not their boss. We
We
are
have
part of an ownership group
True.
that represents them.
We're one of their bosses.
My question would be to Western Lakes Fire District is, do you support the Memorandum of Understanding to ensure that the ownership group is on the same page?
Chief, do you want to come up? Yeah, it'd be great.
Fire board members would.
They're welcome to as well. It doesn't matter.
Not it.
They both jumped up before you. You
Well,
just beat them there.
I got called on.
I just want to preface, when you look at the numbers or anything on the memorandum, that could all change and still has to come to council. We just tried to put together something simple, straightforward, that would be a concept that then we would present to the other members to say, hey, do you want to do this? Because we may find that the other owner members don't. And that's okay, that's up to them, because the core information is in our intermunicipal document, but to this date, that discussion has not been had. That's why we, as a city, have taken a proactive approach to try to help our chief and our board members. Chief.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Stan, you were spot on. Yes, all 4 of you own us. We report to the 4 of you as a whole. So, and then the board is appointed by each of you. So that's my direct boss is the board, and then we all ultimately report to our municipalities and our constituents. The intermunicipal agreement has been pretty clear with regards to the funding and the budgeting process. We followed it, even prior to the name of Western Lakes. That same philosophy and budgeting process and approval process has been used since 1968. I guess it comes down to the 4 communities. You know, if they want more clarity than what's kind of a repeat of the intermunicipal agreement in this memorandum. I don't know if the board members, did I answer? I know you can't speak for the whole board because this hasn't gone to the board. Is there anything else to add?
If you do, you need to come up.
You gotta come up. There.
I guess my only concern is what purpose the Memorandum of Understanding is doing. If you look at the last line, it talks about in the event of the referendum is not approved by all municipalities by November 10th, under the terms of the agreement, the maximum
WFLD budget increase for 2023 shall be 4% unless otherwise agreed upon by all municipalities. Well, that is right out of the agreement. So if we have an agreement that says that, why do we need a memorandum of understanding to say the same thing?
Yeah, because nobody's talking about it. And when you go to meetings and other owners don't know the answer to the question that we just are trying to pose, all it is to get the word out there. Secondly, maybe the other municipalities may want to do something else in a memorandum that we don't know because we haven't asked them. So it basically gives you a draft that you say, okay, this is fine. This is what we should put in, not put in. Again, for council approval, nobody's going rogue or anything. And then that gives them the opportunity to do that. If they say, hey, we're fine with just municipal agreement, then we just throw this away. We were trying to do something to try to have a conversation because we're in May, and with our timeline, that discussion has not been had among the municipal elected officials.
Okay, I'm just speaking for me. I can't speak for the board. But my feeling on it is I'm not sure this does what you're looking for it to do. I think we have to have that conversation. You and I have had that conversation. I agree with that. There are a lot more variables. If one community decides not to go to referendum or doesn't pass a referendum, there's other variables other than just the budget that may be involved.
Correct. And those are things we may take out as a group and then come back for approval. It's just to start the discussion. There's some groups that are talking about not doing a referendum at all. But that's where, so council's aware, we're having a meeting this Thursday evening for just the elected officials to go through all of that and have that open discussion to make sure that we're all on the same page. And on the same page doesn't mean we have to agree, but we're on the same page as to if this happens, then this happens. And that's what we're trying to do. And whether we use a document or not is immaterial depending upon what the four owner groups want to do. Yeah, Alderman Ellis was next. So I understand your position. I don't have a problem with that, Jeff.
Charlie, I also saw you kind of shake your head. Do you have any opinion or anything along those lines in reference to this? I have a couple of questions, so.
Okay.
Well, I agree with Jeff that the language that's in this memorandum of understanding is the same as what's already in the agreement, so there's really no need to have it. Because everybody knows that's what's going to happen is if all the groups don't do the referendum, and if it doesn't pass somewhere, then they have to somehow fund it in a different option, or you go with the maximum you're going to get is 4%.
Okay.
And so that's where kind of the conflict is, because if all four groups do, if let's say one group doesn't, or let's say 2 out of the 4 don't, what you're describing is a binding referendum, and we cannot do a binding referendum. We have to do a non-binding referendum, which basically allows us to have that flexibility in case one of the owner municipalities can't do it. So think about this, and this is kind of why the memorandum is there. The memorandum is to help start the discussion. Whether we use it, I don't know. But think about it. What would happen if City of Oconomowoc is put in a position where we go to referendum, it doesn't pass? Then the same thing happens and we go back again in November. What Charlie just described is that then we are still on the hook for $2.3 million. And that's where the confusion is, because we have to have the discussion with the owner groups, because that's exactly what Charlie just said. And so that is not how it works, okay? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that in front of you, Charlie.
That's okay.
But that's where the confusion happens. And so when the owner municipalities have that same level of confusion, we just got to sit down and talk, which is what we're planning on doing on Thursday, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was not finished.
Oh,
I was
sorry
not
about that.
finished. So basically what I see this as is a structured blueprint. In other words, it's nothing that's going to be binding in a sense, but it's giving us the ability to have an idea, myself personally, have an idea of what are the talking points? What do we have to discuss? How do we have to, what happens if the memorandum doesn't pass? What happens if one or two of the municipalities decide that they don't want to go through with this? So I don't think that this is something that is going to be, okay, we did this, this is the way it's going to be, but it's more for talking purposes, if I understand what you're trying to do there.
Yeah, the goal is to get the talking points, but then decide, is there something else that you want to include in it, not include in it? But whether we use it or not, that's really up to the group. What I've witnessed is that not everyone fully understands the process of if it doesn't pass, what happens? And really, that is the number one thing to get aligned.
I will say this, that I understand what you're saying, Charlie, in the sense that we already have this understanding. Why do we need to put it in paper? I get that. But it's for dumb people like me. Because I look at this, if until I saw this, 90% of the stuff here, they say something that after coming to a meeting, as soon as you step outside, you lose 90% of what just happened. So what this does for me, okay, is it just begins the process of me understanding what the actual issues and the talking points are, which then gives me the ability to go out to my constituents and say, okay, these are the issues, these are the talking points, this is what needs to happen, and if this doesn't happen, these are the consequences associated with that. Does that make sense?
It does. I think the big question that comes up is if the referendum doesn't pass, or, with all of the municipalities involved, then the best you're going to be able to get is 4% increase in the budget, which means the services that we have, the 24/7 EMTs and things like that, they're going to be cut.
Right.
And how are you going to go about doing that?
So I will say this, I will say this. That's when, and I don't know how you all feel about this, okay, but I'm saying that's my job. My job is to go out to my neighbor, to my right, to my left, down the street, and say, hey, yeah, I know that this is going to increase our taxes. But at the end of the day, do you want to have the ability to know that when you call 911, the fire department is going to get there before the house burns down? Okay? That's the bottom line. And so it's my job, I'm not speaking for anybody else, okay? It's my job to make my constituents educated and understanding that we need to do this together. So what this does is it just gives me talking points, okay? So that I go out there and I say, okay, guys, I understand that you have a house that's $400,000 and now your taxes are gonna go up $500. I'm just throwing numbers out right now, okay? But my house is more valuable than yours. No, I'm just joking. My house is a $400,000 too. Mine is also gonna go up $500, but guess what? When I call 911, when we call 911, when we have an issue, when we need EMT, they're gonna be there for us. Right now, I can't tell you they will be. You can't drive a Mercedes, or you can't think you're driving a Mercedes and get it at a Yugo price. It's not gonna happen. So that's what this gives me. This gives me that ability to be able to tell them what the real deal is. Now, if there's something that's missing in it, I think we can write that in, can't we?
Yeah, that's just a template to look at it. And, Charlie was exactly right. If it goes to 4% increase, we're in trouble.
Oh, we're screwed.
So the 4% it isn't the number that's important, it's the concept. And so that has to change. So the group may say, you know what, we need to change that. And you as policymakers say, hey, that needs to be a backup plan. Because the other thing that we have to do as a city is we have to put our budget together this summer and this fall, correct? What is our backup plan if it doesn't happen? Now, my gut feeling is that it will happen and this will go forward. And we definitely have to make some major changes to help Western Lakes Fire with labor issues. No question about that. But when I look at it from a budgetary standpoint, it's going to be much more challenging. And that's why you saw the November 10th, because we were trying to do it before a budget, because we're going to have to adjust if it doesn't happen. So it's basically just a risk assessment, trying to make sure that we have our city protected as much as possible in the event that our city does not pass it twice. Alderman Kavieski.
So I asked one of my questions, which is, was answered very well, so I appreciate that. The other thing in regards to the structure for this, so to Kevin's point, everything that you were looking for talking points is in the contract that the owners have in place right now. So, and those are talking points that we've discussed over the last several years as we've been addressing what we were anticipating coming, which is where we're at right now with the referendum. And I believe all of the ownership groups are leaning that way. But this MOU only identifies referendum as funding opportunity. It doesn't identify potential fee opportunities or any other opportunity for funding that a municipality may have in place now or may come between now and the time that it would be required to address. So with that flexibility unknown, and if it's needed, I think sometimes when you look for clarity, sometimes you get, you lose the peripheral, and that starts to create a narrative that isn't necessarily beneficial either, whether it's just for the city or for all of the ownership group, because maybe the town looks for a fee. I don't think we can. I don't know if they can or not. I don't know if they can right now. But those, I don't want to limit those conversations or those opportunities because we're stuck on a referendum. And I don't want to, I understand the discussion of, well, what happens if the city doesn't pass it? Well, what happens if the city does pass it and Dousman doesn't?
Well, and
Right? So
those are the discussions that we're going to start having because we want to be prepared, to your point, because those are accurate. I can't tell you what Dousman's going to do. I can't tell you what Summit's going to do. I can't tell you what Ottawa's going to do, because those are the discussions we're starting to have. And then we'll utilize, I know Chief has good ideas, but we honestly haven't sat down and talked about it.
So we had to have some of those discussions in meetings. What happens if Dousman doesn't pass it and everybody else does? They're obligated to figure it out. I believe to the
It's just the opposite.
No, the opposite. That's the issue. What you just said is where the miscommunication is. That's what we're trying to help with. And so and that's what we're trying to do. And we're just trying to help each other so we just get aligned. It's really, it's kind of that simple, but we want to make sure that we're good neighbors with all of them. So I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Go back, Mr. Kavieski.
So, again, we have had some of those discussions. I think it was Dousman that had some of those concerns in the last meeting or the meeting before that. Believe whatever that action is required or not required is outlined in the agreement of ownership, right?
Right, it says everybody has veto power, period.
If it's over 4%.
If it's over 4%. And I think what's lost here, and the chief knows well, we are restricted by the state as to how much we can increase our levy.
Correct.
And that's why we need to go to referendum.
Right.
And if one party doesn't go to referendum, then it's going to be a maximum of 4%, period. That's the way it is, under the contract.
So it's
I'm going to just come back to Alderman Rozak, who's tried to talk. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Then
that's
I
okay.
can come back.
I want to try to simplify it. So with the heightened timeline, I get the concept of the MOU. We had a discussion last week about the boat launch where we were going to go in without an MOU. What I'm being told by our board members who we've put into this position are intimately familiar with what's going on is they don't think it's necessary. I also don't think it's necessary. I think it's another step we're putting into this process this short, with this short a timeframe. We got a discussion on May 11th. We're going to try to get them to agree to the MOU between now and May 11th in a meeting you're having on Thursday or whatever you said, Wednesday or Thursday. I feel like it's another step in the process. This might have been something good we should have done maybe 6 months ago. I think right now it's overly complicating this. And all these, to Kevin's point, I do like the talking points, and we kind of have these out there already. They're part of your presentations, and I think what he's looking for and what I think would be helpful for all of us is a really quick summary of what we're voting on and what we're trying to get. It doesn't have to be in an MOU. It could be in something very, very brief, very simple to us as, here's what you guys need to keep in mind moving forward. I think that would be
Well, and
helpful for me.
that's why we brought it to council, is for
Yep.
you guys to decide and give us direction.
Yep.
And I hope you're hearing that right now, if it doesn't pass, there's still confusion as to what happens. That's
No, there
the
is no
num-
confusion now, because
Yes, there is.
if Dousman decides that they don't want to do it, it's 4%. If, say it passes here, but it doesn't pass in the town or whatever, it's 4%. So everybody has to, is that, am I wrong?
But Alderman, you heard tonight, our members here don't even know.
I don't agree with
And-
that.
Well, I just heard 30 seconds ago, someone saying that they have to figure it out.
To the maximum.
Okay,
Yeah, to the
perhaps I
max.
misunderstood
Yeah,
that.
to the max.
But I mean, I know that Ottawa doesn't understand it.
Well, hopefully this meeting on Thursday, some of these things.
That would be
Trying to do,
perfect,
yeah.
yes.
I don't mind you, I mean, you discussed the MOU with them, but at least my position at this point is it's overly complicating things this late in the game, and I think we should avoid it, especially if our board members who we trust to do this stuff are telling us, probably not needed now. That's kind of where I'm at, so.
Yeah,
But I
it's-
appreciate the idea.
Can-
It's a
can I
good
say-
discussion.
We're just trying to be proactive.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't
it's a
care
good
how we
discussion.
do it. Alderman
But
Shellpepper.
Alderman Rozak, with all due respect to the board members, they're looking out for the board. They're looking out for Western Lakes Fire District. And I know that they're looking out, we're appointed by the city to be there, but at the end of the day, we're representing our own body, and we're representing the city. So to put it all on our opinion on what the board says, I disagree with that. And we've been in that position many times with other boards where we've said the same thing. So I don't quite understand why, whatever they say, we then agree with it and discount their opinion. So the question is, though, to use this memorandum of understanding, it's to use it, is it to use as like a bargaining chip going back and forth? So, okay, we're gonna get an idea of, here's what we're committing to, this is what you might commit to, we might change what's in this MOU, or this is just to lay out in straightforward terms what the first grab is at this referendum.
Correct. It's not a bargaining chip, it's not negotiation. It's to get all four of us aligned. And that's the issue, because right now, I think that can happen easily on Thursday. Whether we do a MOU or not, you guys have to tell us what you want. This is just one recommendation. What I don't want to be doing is jamming something down your throat in a week and a half, and we haven't had the discussion. Alderman Mulder?
Yeah, if it is redundant, I don't see how it complicates things. If it's redundant, then they can sign it because they already knew it. And if it is redundant, we're asking our community to pay 2.3 million, the surrounding community to pay 6.3 million additional every single year. So that's an infinite amount we're asking them to pay. And to not want to have one more check and say, yep, we all understand, seems like, why wouldn't we what's the risk in taking that step? If this is a document that Stan and the mayor, who know a lot more about what's going on behind the scenes than we do, that there's still confusion, then I really want this out there so that they put their ink on the page and say, yep, I finally understand. Because this is a big deal, and the fact that it's not binding is somewhat immaterial, because, as everybody's pointed out, 4% is not going to provide our citizens with safety. So if the two people that are most intimately knowledgeable about the mindset of the other people that they want to sign this document, then I think we let them move forward to try to get those names on the page, so that we know we're good.
But I think that presumes that they are more knowledgeable about what they are. I don't think
More than we are. We don't know
The
anything.
MOU hasn't been discussed with them at all, is my understanding.
No, I mean, we're not moving forward on anything until we get council approval in direction. If you guys say, hey, all we're looking for is, what do you want us to do? So we can give them a bullet point list, which is, I think, if I'm interpreting Alderman Rozak, a bullet point list of what's going on, and we can bring that on Thursday. We can bring an MOU to just say, hey, we want to make sure everybody's aligned with what we're doing. The main thing is have the discussion. If you remember at our last meeting at the school, I mentioned a memorandum of understanding to get everybody on the same page. So I brought it up at that meeting. When I was kind of going to drop it because it looked like things were going well, when I left the board meeting last Monday, and I had one of the owner members, and I walked to that person to their car, and they did not have a full concept of what would happen for their community. It was really obvious that we just have to work together and communicate. Chief Bowen's been 100% supportive of, he put the meeting together so that we do this. How we implement it, that you guys just have to give us direction. We're just giving you one option. If you say, hey, I want a bullet point list, we'll do bullet point list, no signatures. Because really at the end of the day, it's a repeat. What happens if they say, geez, let's amend this and do something different? I would rather do that before May 11th. Because the other thing we want you to realize, if you as a governing body decides that this goes to referendum, it has to happen before the end of May. And so we want to make sure that we're prepared, our community's prepared. And if we do that, we want to be prepared for our next council meeting on the 17th. Because if we're not prepared, there's a good chance we'll have to have a special meeting of the city council before the 31st. If we need to, we will. If we don't have to and we're prepared, that would be our preference. Chief.
That's because the language is required by the end of May.
Correct.
So the language for the actual referendum has to be done by the end of May.
Correct.
Or it can't make the August ballot.
And it has to be approved by council. That language and going to referendum has to be approved by this body.
And all other municipalities too at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For their referendum. Chief, so you've been so patient. Sam.
No, it's all good. I made notes so I didn't forget. And a lot of the questions of the what if is very common in joint projects. Whatever it is, not just the fire department. You guys just talked 2 weeks ago about the boat launch. So Elkhorn went through this with their 4 communities. Cambridge has gone through this with their 3. So there's differences between binding and non-binding. That's why we go back to our intermunicipal agreement. So this basically pulls that section out of it. And we haven't had to balance budgets the way that they were done in the past. Prior to Western Lakes existing, the spirit of cooperation, which is the foundation of the district and has been repeated and pounded into my head by the other partners, is the spirit of cooperation. There were times that to balance a budget, even though this community had to pay 35% and this one had to pay this percentage, that they said, hey, to balance it, we're gonna work this out. So that's that spirit of cooperation, which is always addressed during the budget process. We haven't had to have that kind of down and dirty budget process to overall balance it. But that has happened in the past because of the elected bodies as a whole, looking at the overall service of the region, not just as independents. So between Summit, Dousman, and Ottawa, they have done that. Even before I was chief here, they had done that for a couple of years to make sure things were balanced. But ultimately, the letter of the intermunicipal agreement is they need full support for anything over a 4% from all the communities, or some sort of a balancing act between the communities. So, and that question of the what if there's not support to move forward, whether it's the proposed amount from the task force and the proposed staffing levels, let's say it's something different that now that the survey results will be presented on May 11th, the communities discuss and present a different direction, that is where we move forward from there. We still have to come back to the budget season, and that's why these are non-binding referendums, that just because it was approved for one doesn't mean that everybody else has to. That's the communication between the communities. That's all I had. And there are other options than a referendum, and some of them have looked into those.
Alderman Shellpepper.
So that my biggest concern with this MOU is, we all as a body haven't yet agreed to these terms even. And so that's what I'm worried about is like, we go forward to the other community or municipalities and we're saying this is the MOU, we're working off of. How does that move forward?
We basically would go to them and say, all of these numbers are optional.
Yeah.
So we don't know, one of the questions we have for you guys is, you have a request or an ask of $6.3 million. We don't know, for the whole thing, which is about 2.3 for the city, is that, do you feel that that's the right number? Are you comfortable with that number? Because we've never asked that question. So.
And you want to
we're-
have that discussion right now?
Yeah,
Oh,
what we're
oh,
trying,
man,
we're
yeah.
trying to do is figure out what your positions are, so we start having these discussions. And that's where we're trying to help so we can be proactive. Yeah, Alderman Kavieski.
So, again, I believe I made it to all the meetings. The 6.3 has been something that has been discussed and agreed to. Maybe not all of the members of council have been there, but by enough to support moving it forward. I'd be shocked if a majority of this body, if you take a straw poll right now, didn't support the 6.3.
Well, that's just what we're looking for,
But
because
we've had
haven't.
those discussions over months. This is not something, I guess this is not something new. This 6.3 is not a surprise to me. This is something that's been discussed, vetted, highly presented. If you think that we need to do that, I think we should put that to bed like right now.
Well, what I'm trying to find out is if there's any difference, because when you meet with everyone, we have no idea what the other municipalities are thinking. So my impression is the same as yours, Alderman, that 6.3 is fine, and that's what you would want to bring forward. But we haven't had that open discussion, and it's never been, if you remember, most all these meetings, we had to decide on what's the number going to be and what's the agreement going to look like. We're just having the pre-discussion here because we need to really start thinking about it so that we can act on what we want on May 11th and everybody's well prepared. Or if you need more information, let us know and we'll try to get it for you. Yeah, Alderman Ellis.
So I have two questions. First question is, so it's 6.3, of which we're at 2.2.
2.3.
2.3, okay? Let's assume that Dousman doesn't pass. Could we pick up theirs?
We can't, we don't have the money to pay for it, no.
Okay, I'm asking, because it's going to be a question that some constituent is going to ask that question, and I want to know the answer to it. Okay.
I mean, we're potentially going to a referendum because we don't have $2.3 million in perpetuity in our tax roll. And if we did that, we'd have to do drastic cuts on all city services to do that.
So my second question is, what is that to the resident? What does 2.3 look like to the resident?
$80 per 100,000 of assessed value. So the
$80
average,
per 100,000.
$20 on your $400,000 house.
Right,
20.
320, okay.
so 54% of the community assessed value is at 315,000 or less. That's 54% of our population. That is taxable, yes.
It ends up being 16% increase.
16% on the mill rate.
17 actually on the mill rate.
So these numbers
Don't confuse me.
have been discussed, I guess, they've been discussed.
Nobody's agreed to them, Lou.
I know.
I
but
mean, you're acting like we've all voted on it before.
I'm not saying that
Yeah.
this body hasn't, but this body, as part of the ownership group of Western Lakes, has been presented this.
Right,
Absolutely.
don't
So
disagree.
I just, again, this is an open meeting. These numbers aren't new. This is not something, and I'd request, and I understand what you're saying. So I'd request that Alderman Altman-Cloth hasn't been an active part of council during that whole period of time. So maybe there's some additional information, but I know you've done a lot of homework. leading up to this date. So but if you need additional information, maybe you don't feel comfortable, but maybe just let's see where the comfort level is now.
Well, if you have any questions, we can talk about it, Alderman Cloth.
Well, I do have a question for
Great.
Chief Bowen, but I will address what Lou said. I'm completely comfortable with where we're at. Between attending meetings, being at the joint meeting at the high school, sitting down with Chief Bowen, him explaining to me what's going on, literally reading everything and anything I can get my hands on. I don't want to sound conceited, but I feel like I'm just as up to speed as you guys are, okay? My question for Chief Bowen, though, what you kind of brought up is, you know, are there people that aren't comfortable with the number? Have you had any feedback of whether it's Oconomowoc or Dousman or anyone saying that, we could maybe be okay with it, but lower it?
I haven't gotten that directive. Everybody wanted to get the survey completed, hear the final survey results, come together as a meeting. It's kind of been our process for ever since inception of the district, going back to the 1960s, that there's always a lot of what-ifs, but talk from the facts and have good, open discussion as a group, because it is truly a partnership. It's not a us versus them, and even if we weren't consolidated, we rely on our mutual aid neighbors. We rely on our neighbors still to this day. We provide assistance to them, they provide assistance to us. It really comes down to, so far the dialogue that I have heard from the other chief electeds, not whole boards, is, hey, you know, we appointed the task force, we've been talking about this for years. This wasn't a rushed initiative. This was talked about even prior to consolidations, that the fire EMS model of paid on call and part-time has been a struggle for decades. So let's get together, let's hear what the results are, and let's have a good discussion of how to solve that, whether it's what was brought forward from the task force, or if there is an adjustment to it, and what that adjustment means to staffing levels and then long-term sustainability, what that changes.
So without sounding harsh, if you haven't had a lot of feedback or a lot of pushback on the number, let's not create an issue that isn't there. I mean, the number seems.
Yeah, I
people-
mean, we just don't know. We're just trying to get direction because Mark, Lori, and I are going to these meetings, and we're just trying to get a sense of where you guys are. The goal is that we are as prepared as possible for a little over a week from now on May 11th, so that you guys have all the information together. That's the goal. Our goal isn't to change the number, make it higher, make it lower. We're just trying to make sure everybody knows what happens if this moves forward at whatever number. But what number do you want? I mean, if you guys say, hey, we're really comfortable with where we are, great. But what we don't want to do is go into a meeting and then we have challenges because we're in a difficult time frame in making sure everything gets done by the end of May. So I think by having this discussion, we should be really well prepared, and you guys can make the decisions you want to make. Alderman Rozak.
Yeah, no, I think the discussion's been great. So, you know, my thought is, let's pull this together in a PowerPoint with the other meeting of all the joint owners on the 11th. I just don't think there's enough time to monkey around with negotiating an MOU with other Summit and Dousman and Ottawa. And I think we should get the basics of this in some type of, you know, easy to read format. And if there's questions that we have, you have, Mark has, we should get them to Mark as soon as possible and have Chief Bowen address them at the meeting on the 11th with everyone there. And same thing, like when you go to the chief electeds, when you meet with them on Thursday, ask Riley, ask the gal from Dousman, you know, hey, what are the questions? Let's get those ironed out so we can get, here's the 15 questions he's got to answer on the 11th so we're all on the same page. You know, to me, that's the way to do it. And then we're all in the same room listening to the same answer, so.
Alderman Spiegelberg.
I don't think we all agree on this. I'm actually in support of the MOU. I'm okay with the 6.3 also, because I think that number's kind of been vetted, and I think that's probably a worst-case scenario number. I think the MOU definitely clears up some confusions that are apparently out there, and I think there's only an upside with doing it versus a downside. But I think maybe the mayor would want to know how we're all feeling on this.
And I'm happy to go either direction, so I'm just trying to make sure we have the discussion. Alderman Kavieski.
I'm not sure if everybody is in agreement of the MOU, but what I would like to ask for, Mayor, is if you would call for a show of hands or a straw poll, if we're, as a body, independent of the previous conversations, comfortable with the 6.3, and then we can put that particular question to bed, and then move forward with if we truly, as a body, feel the MOU is necessary, or if what Alderman Rozak just outlined is acceptable.
No, I think that's a fair direction. Any other comments before we do that so we can keep moving forward? But I think one thing I want to come back to is if you have any questions or anything, please email Mark directly, but copy Lori and myself on it, please. That way we can stay in it. Mark will be the gatekeeper or the coordinator for that, so that we can be prepared to kind of move things forward. So by a show of hands.
Restate what the question is, please, Ms. Mayor.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have two questions at hand. One question I'm going to ask is, are you in favor of the proposed ask of 6.3 million, which is approximately 2 million for the city of Oconomowoc?
So the way that would probably translate is, are you comfortable with moving forward to placing that on a referendum ballot for the vote of the public? 6.3.
Alderman Mulder, you have a look.
Can I ask a question before
Sure,
that?
sure.
If we would decide that, so I'm comfortable with the number 2.3. Don't know that that all needs to be what is actually, the referendum actually is. We could, because there's other ways we can finance that 2.3. I'm in favor of going out on referendum asking for that, because that might be the way we want to go. If we decide that we want some of it to come out of general fund by moving roads onto long-term debt, can we do that, or does the referendum bind us?
The referendum authorizes you
Authorizes,
up
okay.
to that point
Perfect,
to
that's what I
utilize
thought.
that amount of money
just wanted to
and put it
thank you.
on
An
their
excellent
tax
question,
burden.
really good question.
That doesn't
When
require.
we go to 2.3 million, we have to make a decision what that number is for the city of Oconomowoc.
Yep.
Once we define that, then it stays that. You guys can decide, well, maybe it's 3 million or maybe it's 2 million. All of those decisions are there. What we're doing today is just getting an idea. It's not a commitment that you're going to vote this way or that way. We're just trying to get a sense because we haven't had these discussions. So coming back to the question, the first question is, are you in favor, overall in favor of the concept of a $2.3 million potential referendum, or we'll create a way to do that? But are you okay with the number that's been proposed of 6.3 million from Western Lakes? So by a show of hands, if you're in favor, say, raise your hand. Are you, anyone opposed? Okay, so that really helps, because haven't had that question, and I just want to have us be prepared. We haven't had that answer. So I think the straw poll is there. Secondly, you have kind of two options. We can put something formal together with the three other owner municipalities in a memorandum of understanding, if you want, or we can do more of a handshake deal, bullet point presentation that still is binding within our intermunicipal agreement, but there's no need for MOU. So if you're in favor of an MOU, raise your hand. 3, 4. Okay, if you're opposed to an MOU, 4. So it's a tie. That helps me, and we'll have the discussion. And from what I'm hearing, I'll work with staff, if this is comfortable for you, to decide if it's worth it or not. And we'll have that discussion on Thursday, and then we'll reach back out to you. If it's not worth it, we don't want to make more work for ourselves. All I'm trying to do is have the discussion. There's good arguments to have one, and there are good arguments that it's not needed. I don't have a problem with that. Alderman Kavieski.
I really appreciate the approach on this and the discussion, and I would appreciate one more question to the body.
Sure.
I think we're split in regards to the MOU, but if you could ask the question, if another type of document such as Alderman Rozak had kind of outlined in bullet points and further clarity that all the bodies would agree to, just that's more of a marketing positioning standpoint as a memorandum of understanding as in regards to the financing part of it. If this body would would say either or to that.
When I think I'm crystal clear on what you're looking for and what Alderman Rozak brought, I'll work directly with Chief so that we can put it in a frame on a PowerPoint, no matter what on the 11th, that has to be there. Whether you have a memorandum of understanding or not, you know, we have to see what the other municipalities have. We didn't want to go and talk about doing this with the other municipalities when we have no idea of your feelings. Now we know it's kind of split, but probably would be okay either way as long as everybody's aligned as to what happens. And that's really the whole goal.
So the MOU in itself doesn't exist then, because it didn't pass?
No, the MOU we're going to discuss on Thursday to see if there's an interest there or not.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, Mayor, you've been given authorization with your vote since you're the fifth person.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a tie vote, so
It's not
That's
an
how I see it.
official vote. It's here, we're just looking for direction.
But,
I mean, my
In the
feeling
end,
is
make
that-
sure those cities know what they're voting for and that, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess in the end, to your point, Lou,
Yes.
I don't care. I feel like if they have to sign something, there's a greater level of diligence. They're gonna pay attention to it, even though they've already signed the overall understanding between the communities. Sign it again to make sure you know exactly what you're signing up for.
Well, there's no question.
So there's no question about it. And bullet points may or may not do that, but if they sign it, there's a
Yes.
better chance they're paying attention. Because their name is now on record and it's not binding, it means nothing, it's just paper, but it's still their
I
signature.
hear, I mean, that was the initial thought process behind it. So I think City, Matt, or Mark, do you have any questions at all?
Nope.
Are you good with the
I'm crystal
discussion
clear,
and the direction?
crystal clear.
Alderman Kavieski?
One final.
Yeah.
We have multiple owners. I think every one of the ownership group is fully vested in this. And I think they're very engaged, right? There's, whether we have an MOU or not, they're engaged. So to
I think we all agree they're very engaged. The question is, do they understand? That's the issue. And so what we're going to do is try to help that on Thursday. And Chief, Charlie, Jeff, any other comments from you? I think we have a good direction. And really, really appreciate you gentlemen coming out tonight. Charlie, you have something?
Yeah, I do have a quick one. There was
Yeah,
a comment
perfect.
made that because we're on the fire board, our concern is the Western Lakes Fire District. I was appointed by you to be on the fire board. My concern, Jeff's concern, is the
Is the
city of
city.
Oconomowoc.
absolutely,
And thank you very much for that.
absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you, Charlie.
So,
Thank you, Jeff.
great. Well, thank you all very much. Just want to mention to the audience, we're going to be going into closed session in room 3, and then we'll come back after we open the closed session in room 3. So we'll take a small adjournment right now. Council, please go to room 3.
Wouldn't I do the motion now?
Yeah, why don't you, yeah.
I need
We're in
them-
open session, so we got to do the.
Closed session.
I move we
motion.
move into closed session.
You need to read the.
All in favor?
Oh, hold on, I gotta read something.
The closed session. ready? Are you ready? Great. I'd like to call to order the City of,
No, I thought you said
oh,
we were
yes,
coming
I
back
just
into.
need to entertain a motion to close the
So
committee of the
moved.
whole meeting.
Okay, Mayor.
Second.
In favor?